I got a new chair, but I'm not sitting in it for this video because that would make sense. Hello, I'm Caroline, or Miss B overseas, and I have some really awesome middle grade books that I want to tell you about. I actually teach 6th grade English at an international school, international American curriculum school in Dubai. We have not started back to school with students yet. Honestly, I have not given a whole lot of thought to the beginning of the school year. No matter where or what you teach right now, it's just not an easy position to be in. Being a teacher in the midst of a global pandemic, one thing that I know for certain, no matter how or where or when we start, is that I am going to try my absolute hardest to get good books into my students' hands. And I figured, what a better way to get some practice in for how I'm going to book talk these books to my students than screaming to you all on the internet about those same books. The first book that I have to tell you about is Ghost by Jason Reynolds. This story centers around a young boy named Castle Cranshaw, but everyone knows him as Ghost. And Ghost, by coincidence, ends up trying out for this intramural track team, and he discovers that he has a lot of natural talents and gifted abilities when it comes to running and track and field. This kind of goes against everything that Ghost has hoped and dreamed for up until this point, because his whole life he thought that he was going to be this mega basketball player. The rest of the story kind of follows Ghost and the journey that he goes on being a part of this intramural track team. Some of the reasons why I'm recommending this title in particular is that I feel like this book does a really good job at showing the process of what it means to better yourself at a sport. From the beginning, it's very clear that Ghost has these natural talents when it comes to running. However, he is quite a bit behind some of his teammates who have been doing this since, you know, basically for their whole lives. I think it's just really important for students to kind of see what it means to put a lot of work and drive and determination into something, even though you may already have those like natural talents and skills and abilities. There's always room for improvement, and that improvement is going to require hard work and practice and dedication. Also, throughout the course of this story, our main character Ghost faces a lot of microaggressions, both at school and also on his newly joined track team. And he faces these because he is young and Black and growing up in a single parent household. I think it's important that students see these microaggressions and how they are handled, and I think that in the story there's really good examples of people who recognize those microaggressions and call them out, and then there's also people who choose to ignore those or choose to respond to them in a way that isn't necessarily the best way to do so, and I think that would bring up really good talking points for students and middle grade readers. My favorite character in this book is Coach, the coach of the track team. I feel so often in books, teachers or mentors or coach figures can kind of be portrayed one of two really stereotypical ways. One way they can be portrayed is just really neglectful and mean and seen as these kind of one-note people who hate their jobs and hate kids. And then the other stereotype is kind of the savior stereotype, that this coach or mentor figure or teacher is there for the sole purpose of saving these children who can't save themselves, and, you know, stepping up and always making these great decisions and having this great insight, and, you know, these kids need this figure. And neither of those, I think, are an accurate representation of what teachers and coaches really are. Coach as a character in this book is just a perfect representation of what teachers are. He definitely makes mistakes and he owns those mistakes. He also holds the kids accountable for their actions. He holds Ghosts and his kind of newbie group of friends accountable for their actions. It's just really great to see a teacher mentor figure represented that way. Jason Reynolds works really closely with schools and he is around educators and students a lot, and I think that's really reflected in all of his works, but particularly in this one, just with the middle grade voice and then also Coach's character. The next book that I have that I will be selling hard to my students is Pages & Co. by Anna James. This is a fantasy middle grade that centers around a young girl named Tilly who lives with her grandparents, has been raised by her grandparents who own this lovely, wonderful, magical bookshop. The descriptions of this bookshop are just cozy and like full of wonder and just such a great setting for a middle grade novel. So throughout the story, our main character Tilly discovers that she has this sort of magical ability to be able to read herself into books. She discovers is called book wandering, which allows her the capability, like I said, to read herself into her favorite stories, and even more than that, she is able to pull her favorite characters out of stories. I am 100% going to sell this to my students as a book for book lovers. There are so many incredible like literary bookish references, like with Anne of Green Gables and Alice in Wonderland, but what's really more than that is the whole entire story is really just a testament to the wonder of what it means to be a reader and to find yourself lost in a book and enamored of characters. I feel like a lot of students will connect with the main character Tilly in the capacity that at the beginning she has a pretty hard time making friends and she just wishes that she could be friends with the characters in her books. She feels so much more understood by the characters in her books, and she discovers that she has this magical ability where she really can connect with characters in the books. I feel like it's just such a magical and wonderful concept, and it's something that I cannot wait to recommend to my students. The next book I have that I will be forcing into my students' hands at all costs is Dactyl Hill Squad by Daniel Jose Older. This is kind of like a historical fiction urban fantasy. This story takes place during the Civil War in this sort of reimagined Brooklyn, and in this version of Brooklyn, dinosaurs roam the streets and kind of act as taxis and ferries and interact with humans on a day-to-day basis. The story centers around a young Cuban orphan girl named Magdalise, who is just one of my favorite middle grade characters that I've read in a really long time. So essentially, Magdalise and a group of other orphans team up with this sort of underground secret society called the Vigilance Committee, and they're working together because both of them believe that other members from the Colored Orphan Asylum have been kidnapped and are at risk of being sold back into slavery. This story is just like your quintessential middle grade adventure story where there's a group of kids banded together fighting for their friends. All the while they're doing it while flying on dactyl back through like the chimneys and the buildings and streets of Brooklyn. What's more than this just being a really fantastic middle grade novel, like with a found family trope, is that because of the Civil War setting, Daniel Jose Older really takes the opportunity to include some pieces of history in the storyline that aren't always necessarily taught in schools. I feel like in history classes in school, a lot of times learning about the Civil War, Union or the North is painted in this really positive light of that they're fighting against slavery to dismantle slavery, and that's not always entirely true. Daniel Jose Older makes sure to include elements like the Vigilance Committee, which was a real underground society that was fighting for the protection of Black and brown children and Black and brown people that were being kidnapped from the North and being sold back into slavery. Daniel Jose Older, I think, really balances out a story that is just fun and adventurous with kids flying around on dinosaurs, and then also including really important and prevalent unknown facts about history. Okay, we are down to our last middle grade title that I am going to tell you about, and I actually have a physical copy of this one. The final middle grade that I have to tell you about is The Honest Truth by Dan Gemeinhart. This is a contemporary that centers around a young boy named Mark, who at the beginning of the story sets off from his parents' house with his dog with the plan to run away from home and climb to the top of Mount Rainier. As the story goes on, you understand that what is motivating Mark to run away from home is that he has a cancer diagnosis that is steadily worsening. From an English teacher standpoint, I really love using this book in class, like with my whole class. It has these, let me see if I can find it, half chapters that show, instead of Mark's perspective, who's running away to climb this mountain, it shows his family and friends' perspective back home, who are worried, sick, and are searching for him. It's really good to kind of pinpoint what narrative perspectives are and to teach those perspective shifts and to kind of pose the question of why do you think the author chose to include the perspective of Mark's family and friends back home. That is even more than the teaching component that makes this book so wonderful. I have read this book several times. The first time that I read it, though, was just personally for myself, and what I thought that I was getting into was going to be this sort of like Hatchet by Gary Paulson survival story about this boy who is going to climb this mountain. And what I ended up reading instead of a survival story was a story of a boy fighting to survive and fighting to take back control of his own life before he dies from this cancer. And it's really just a beautiful story about Mark and the people that he meets along the way as he journeys to this mountain. And the people that he encounters hurt him and harm him, but they also help him and heal him and give him so much hope. I think that the author didn't hold back when it comes to Mark's anger in the face of the grief that he is experiencing for his family and friends that he knows he is going to leave behind, but then also grief and anger at, you know, his childhood lost because of his cancer diagnosis. It brings up so many poignant and important topics to discuss with students. This is definitely one of those books that no matter what grade I taught, I would try to incorporate it into my lessons somehow. I think it's just one of those books that transcends age, and I would put this into anyone's hands regardless of whether or not they were actually in the middle grade age range. So those are the 4 middle grade recommendations that I am going to start my year off with my students. Like I said, start of the school year, kind of up in the air, kind of haven't thought about it yet. But if there's one thing that I have thought about and do know for certain, it's that I will be cultivating a love of reading in my students. If you have any middle grade recommendations that you think my students would enjoy or I would enjoy, let me know. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a fantastic day, and until next time, goodbye.